My son told me not to speak at his wedding because I made people uncomfortable. Not because I was loud, not because I ever said a harsh word, but because my faith, my prayers, and the way I've always whispered blessings before big moments didn't fit the image they wanted for that day. So I sat in the second row. I smiled for the pictures, I clapped when they kissed, and I didn't say a word, but I left behind something they couldn't ignore forever. That night, before I stepped out of the guest room, I reached into my bag and placed a small, worn Bible under the pillow. No note, no explanation, just one quiet act of love, waiting in silence. And 1 year later, after the marriage she was so proud of fell apart, after the vows she wanted so badly turned to ash, he found it, that Bible, still there, right under the pillow where she used to sleep. And in that moment, he finally understood the power he once pushed away. My name is Ruth. I'm 66 years old, and I've lived most of my life in the same modest house, on the same quiet street, with the same worn rug by the kitchen sink that's caught more prayers than most church pews. I raised my son Johnson on my own after his father passed unexpectedly in the winter of '97. He was only 8 at the time, still small enough to hold my hand without shame, but old enough to feel the coldness of loss settle into his bones. From that moment on, it was just the two of us, me and my boy. We didn't have much, but we had rhythm. Mornings started with scripture at the table, proverbs and pancakes. Evenings ended with bedtime prayers, his tiny voice whispering beside mine as we both asked God to keep the lights on and the grief away. On Saturdays, I'd hum old gospel songs while folding laundry, and he'd join in, off-key and smiling, always adding his own silly twist to the lyrics. He made even sorrow sound sweet. I worked 2 shifts most weeks, nurse's aide during the day, diner waitress at night. My feet ached, but I still made it to every school concert, every parent night, every scraped knee and spelling test. I once spent my last $20 on a suit jacket from Goodwill so he'd feel sharp at his first debate tournament. He never knew. I wanted him to feel like a king, even when I was breaking bread in half to stretch it across the week. Johnson was a thoughtful child. Curious, gentle. He used to slip notes into my Bible during church, little drawings of angels or verses he liked. And every time he had a big test or a hard decision, he'd come sit at the edge of my bed, swing his feet like he did when he was 5 and say, "Mama, can you pray for me real quick?" And I always did. I never told him, but I prayed for him every night anyway. Even when he didn't ask. Somewhere along the way, the asking stopped. Maybe it was college, maybe it was pride. Maybe it was the world convincing him that faith was something you outgrow like baby teeth and lullabies. But the quiet grew between us, and I let it. Not because I stopped loving him, but because sometimes the only way to hold on to someone is to give them the space to find their own way back. So I kept praying. Quietly. Even when he didn't ask. Even when he rolled his eyes. Even when the girl he brought home looked right through me like I was just furniture. Because when you love someone deeply, you learn that love doesn't always have to be loud. Sometimes it's just steady, waiting, watching, hoping, like a worn Bible under a pillow, just in case. Johnson was in his late 20s when he brought her home. Her name was Melissa. She was beautiful in the way magazines teach you to be. Polished, composed, with just the right amount of mystery in her voice. She walked like she belonged in high places. And maybe she did. But I could feel, from the moment she stepped through my doorway, that she wasn't planning to stay grounded for long. Still, I welcomed her the way I was raised to. I fixed her a plate with the biggest piece of baked chicken, offered her a glass of sweet tea, told her she was welcome in my home and in my prayers. And she smiled, but not with her eyes. There was a coldness behind her compliments. A stillness in how she looked around my living room, like she was cataloging everything she'd never want in her future. She ran her fingers along the picture frames, the Bible on the side table, the hand-stitched cross-stitch I made back when Johnson was born. All those little pieces of me, and I could see they didn't move her. When we bowed our heads to say grace, I noticed hers stayed upright, eyes open, hands resting idly in her lap. Not rude, just distant, like she was politely tolerating something old-fashioned. I didn't say anything, I just prayed a little longer than usual, hoping maybe the Spirit might nudge her in time. But it wasn't Melissa I was watching. It was Johnson. The way he shifted uncomfortably. The way he cleared his throat when I mentioned church. The way he suddenly started saying, "Maybe we can skip grace tonight, Mama. It's late." And when I asked if everything was all right, if something felt off, he looked at me softer than usual and said, "Mama, not everyone connects with God the way you do." And just like that, I felt the quiet begin to grow between us. It wasn't a fight. It wasn't even an argument. It was a slow pulling away, like a boat gently drifting from shore, one quiet inch at a time. I tried not to take it personal. Melissa was new. Love makes people act strange, and I wanted to give them room to build whatever future they saw fit. But deep in my chest, I felt something loosening, like my hands were slipping from something I'd carried my whole life. He started calling less, visiting less. His voice changed, not angry, just edited, filtered. Like every sentence was run through a screen before it reached me. And I kept wondering, how could something as soft and sacred as prayer make someone feel so unwelcome? But I didn't ask. I just kept setting his favorite plate on the table every Sunday. And I kept cooking enough food for two, just in case he came hungry for more than just dinner. Because I knew. One day, silence wasn't going to be enough to feed him. And when that day came, I hoped he'd remember where he left his roots. It wasn't long before wedding plans filled the air. Not just talks of flowers and food, but mood boards, color palettes, and hashtags. Melissa was organized, I'll give her that. She had spreadsheets for everything. The seating chart, the signature drinks, the dress code. She knew what she wanted and what she didn't. And somewhere, in all that planning, I offered what I thought was the gentlest of requests. Maybe I could say a prayer before the ceremony, or offer a blessing during the dinner. Just a small one. Johnson didn't answer right away. He just looked at Melissa. And she didn't say a word. She didn't have to. That's when Johnson turned back to me. Not harsh, not cruel, but careful. Too careful. He said, "I just don't want religion to overshadow the day. Could you maybe just be present and quiet?" That word, quiet. It did something to me. Like a cold wind brushing against an old scar. I swallowed the lump rising in my throat and nodded. Smiled like it didn't sting. Like I hadn't dreamed of that moment. Of standing before the two of them, asking God to cover their union in grace and protection. But in my chest, something broke. Not loudly, not all at once. Just a soft crack. The kind that starts small and spreads over time. So I said okay, and I meant it. I wouldn't bring my voice, I wouldn't bring my prayer, but I would bring my love. I found my old leather Bible, the one with the frayed edges and scribbled margins, the one that had soaked up more tears than tissues ever could. I slipped it into my bag the night before the wedding. No one saw me do it. No one asked. I folded my dress carefully, ironed Johnson's baby picture into a card, picked out a shawl in case it got chilly that evening. And with my Bible tucked neatly between a pair of gloves and a lavender sachet, I zipped up the suitcase and said to myself, if I can't bless the day with my voice, maybe I can still bless it with my silence. I didn't plan to read from it. I didn't plan to make a scene. I just needed something with me that still felt holy. Because even if they didn't want God at the altar, I wasn't ready to leave him behind. Not for them. Not for anyone. The day was beautiful. I'll give them that. The venue sat on a hilltop, kissed by a breeze that carried the scent of garden roses and eucalyptus. The chairs were wrapped in ivory ribbons, and soft jazz played from hidden speakers as guests arrived in their Sunday best, some wearing smiles too tight for comfort. Melissa wore white, of course, but not the kind that speaks of innocence or grace. It was a designer gown, tailored and crisp, hugging her like it was made to impress more than to express. Johnson looked handsome. My boy always cleaned up well. But there was a weight behind his eyes that I recognized, the kind that comes when you know deep down you've left something behind, but you're too far along to go back and pick it up. They had champagne glasses on silver trays, personalized menus, a harpist playing softly in the background, but not a drop of scripture, no invocation, no prayer, no mention of God, just polished vows and poetic promises written for performance. And me? I sat in the second row. I smiled when they said, "I do." I clapped when they kissed. I posed for photos, held my corsage, and thanked strangers for complimenting my dress. But inside, I felt invisible. Not because anyone said something unkind, but because I knew my presence had been requested, but not my spirit. So I smiled. I didn't weep. I didn't pull Johnson aside or hand him a note or whisper anything to Melissa. I simply waited for the end of the evening, when the lights dimmed and the laughter faded into leftovers, and when the house was still, the kind of still that only comes after a long performance. I slipped away to the guest room they'd prepared for me. Everything was folded neatly. Fresh linens, a little mint on the pillow. Politeness wrapped in distance. I reached into my bag, pulled out the same Bible that had seen me through births and burials, joy and grieving, hope and heartbreak. I opened to a bookmarked page, Psalm 127, and placed it beneath the pillow, not on the nightstand, not in plain sight, but under the place where someone rests their head. And as I turned off the lamp and laid down in that unfamiliar bed, I thought to myself, I didn't say a word. But I left one. Because sometimes, the most powerful sermons are the ones whispered in silence. And I knew one day that silence would speak. The wedding came and went like a summer storm, bright, loud, and over too quickly. And after that came the silence. At first, it was small, a missed call here, a we've been busy there. The kind of things you convince yourself are normal in a young couple's life. But then weeks turned into months, and that little silence started to feel more like a wall. The phone stopped ringing. My messages went from long and loving to short and careful. Just checking in. Hope you're well. Dinner's always waiting if you come by. But they stayed marked as delivered. Never read. He used to send me Bible verses. Little texts with psalms or gentle encouragements. Once, out of the blue, he sent me Proverbs 31 and said, "This one reminds me of you." That was before Melissa, before the edits. Now he sends me silence. And silence, when it's from your own child, is a very specific kind of heartbreak. I'd sit in the same chair by the window every night, light a candle, pull out my Bible, and open it to the same passage, the one I left under his pillow. Unless the Lord builds the house, the builders labor in vain. I didn't cry loudly, I didn't pace or complain, but I prayed. Every night, same chair, same tear sliding down the same cheek. Because no matter how far he drifted, I stayed anchored. Not because I was desperate, but because I knew. When the world starts shaking, people don't run toward what's new. They run toward what's never moved. And I made sure I was still there, the same soft landing, the same old light left on in the hallway of his memory. Sometimes love isn't about how loud you shout for someone to come home. Sometimes it's about staying exactly where they left you. So when they come back, broken and bleeding, they know exactly where to find you. And so I stayed, quiet, prayerful, waiting. Time has a way of peeling the truth back, even when no one says a word. The house stayed quiet, but the neighborhood didn't. Around here, word gets around. Not in a malicious way, but in that gentle southern hum of porch conversations and grocery store glances. It started with Mrs. Calhoun next door. She leaned over the fence one morning while I was tending to my collard greens and said, "Ruth, I saw your daughter-in-law at the pharmacy the other day." She looked off, all dressed up, but pacing outside like she didn't know where she was going. I didn't flinch, just nodded, smiled, said, "Well, life can be a heavy coat sometimes." But something inside me stirred. Then it was Mr. Wells from 2 streets down who mentioned seeing Johnson alone at the coffee shop. No wedding ring, no wife, just him and a paper cup staring out the window like he'd lost something important but couldn't remember what it was. Still, I didn't pry, but I started listening more carefully when the phone did ring. His voice, once full of color, now came through like gray skies, flat, short, and tired. He used to laugh when he said, "Hey mama." Now it sounded like obligation, like a man going through the motions. "I'm fine," he'd say. Always fine. But I heard the weight behind it. I heard it in the way he exhaled before speaking, in the pauses that stretched just a little too long, in the way he'd say, "We're just busy," but never mention Melissa by name. I wanted to ask. I wanted to say, "What's really going on, baby?" But I didn't. Because what haunted me more than what he said was what he didn't. Not once. Not even when his voice cracked, not even when I could hear the ache sitting in his throat, did he ask me to pray. And that, more than anything else, told me how far he'd drifted. Because when a son stops turning to his mother for comfort, you know he's either built up walls too high to climb, or he's surrounded himself with people who told him her comfort wasn't worth needing. Still, I prayed. Even if he never asked for it, I kept sending it up like smoke signals to a God who listens even when children don't. Because something in my soul whispered, he's not fine. And it won't be long now. It was a Tuesday, late afternoon, the kind of day where the sky looks tired and even the birds seem too weary to sing. I was folding towels in the hallway, mine somewhere between memory and prayer, when the phone rang. Johnson's name lit up on the screen, and before I could even say hello, I heard it, the break in his voice. Mama. One word. And I knew. She's gone, he said. Not in the way that means death, in the way that means abandonment, emptiness, a home turned hollow overnight. He told me she packed 2 suitcases while he was at work. Took the car, the savings, and every last drop of trust he had left. The account was drained, the apartment half empty. No note, no explanation, just absence. And then silence. I didn't ask questions. I didn't ask what happened, why now, how long had this been coming. I could hear it all in his breathing, in the pause between his words, in the exhaustion of a man who tried to build a future without the foundation I once handed him, and who now stood in the ruins, wondering how it all collapsed so quickly. There was a long pause. He didn't cry. Not yet, he just whispered, I don't know what to do. I waited a moment, let the space breathe, and then I asked gently, do you want to come home? He didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked like a boy's again. Raw, searching, lost. I don't know where else to go. And in that moment, I felt something settle inside me. Not satisfaction, not revenge, just confirmation. That all the nights I prayed, all the times I felt like my love had no place to land, it was never wasted. I'll make your bed, I said. That's all. No, I told you so. No, didn't I warn you? No lecture, no judgment. Because sometimes, when a child finally turns around after walking through fire, what they need isn't a sermon. They just need a door that's still open. So I made his bed. Laid out fresh towels. Opened the window just a crack, the way he liked it when he was little. And I set one thing on the nightstand, a glass of water and a lamp already turned on. Because after all the darkness, I wanted his first night back home to have a little light. He arrived just before sundown. No big entrance. No packed suitcases. Just a tired man with slumped shoulders and a face that looked like it hadn't seen peace in a long time. He was thinner than I remembered. Not starved, just worn down. Like the world had carved pieces out of him, and he hadn't had time to heal between the cuts. His eyes were red, not just from crying, but from nights that hadn't let him sleep. He didn't say much. Just stepped out of the car, closed the door softly, and looked at the house like it was something ancient. Familiar, but distant. I walked to the porch and opened the door before he could knock. We didn't hug hard. I didn't squeeze him or sob into his shoulder. I just put my hand on his back, that same spot I used to pat when he had nightmares as a boy, and said, "Come on in, baby." He stepped over the threshold like someone crossing a bridge back into memory. That night, after a quiet dinner where most of the talking came from the clock ticking on the wall, he stood in the hallway for a moment, unsure. Then he turned toward the room at the end. His old room. The door creaked open just like it always did. I'd made the bed earlier, fresh sheets, window cracked just enough to let the breeze in. His trophies still lined the shelf, a few old photos on the dresser. I hadn't changed much, not because I was holding on, but because some places are meant to feel like time never touched them. He didn't ask questions, just stepped inside, set his phone down without checking it, and sat on the edge of the bed. And just like before, he laid his head on that same pillow. There was a long stillness, and then he stirred. I watched from the hallway, quiet as breath, as he reached beneath the pillow and pulled something out, slowly, like he already knew what he was going to find. My Bible. The same one I'd tucked there on the night of his wedding. The same one he'd once rested his head on during childhood fever nights, open to Psalm 23. He held it in his hands like it was made of glass and memory all at once. No words, no questions, just him. And the truth he had spent so long avoiding now resting in his palms. And I, standing outside that door, didn't move, because I knew. The real homecoming wasn't him walking through my door. It was him opening that Bible. He sat there for a long while, just holding it. My Bible. The one I'd carried through funerals and floods, through joy and heartbreak. Through every season a woman like me survives with faith and stubborn hope. It looked so small in his hands now. This boy I raised, now a man, trying to understand how something so simple could carry so much weight. He opened it gently, almost as if it might fall apart. And right there, tucked inside the front cover, was the note I'd written the night before his wedding. Folded neatly, my handwriting still pressed into the paper like a whisper waiting to be heard. He unfolded it. In case the world ever breaks your heart, this is where you'll find mine. That's all it said. No sermon, no guilt, just a mother's heart left behind in ink and intention. He didn't say anything, but I saw the way his shoulders dropped, not in defeat, but in release. Like he was letting go of everything he had tried to hold up on his own. He flipped through the pages, slowly at first, then faster. I knew what he was finding. Little underlined verses, tiny notes in the margins, prayers written in the corners, dates next to scriptures. His name scribbled next to Psalm 91, he who dwells in the shelter of the Most High. Verses I'd claimed over his life since he was a baby. Promises I'd whispered over him when he didn't even know what the word loss meant. And in the middle of all that scripture, all that sacred memory, he found himself again. I heard his breath catch, and then the quiet sound of a man beginning to break. Not loudly, not violently, just the slow unraveling of pride, the gentle cracking of walls built too high for too long. There was no one there to judge him, no one to rush the moment, just the sound of a page turning, and a mother standing just outside the door, her own breath held, knowing that sometimes the only way back to faith is through the fire, and he was finally letting it burn. The next morning I woke up early, like I always do, put the kettle on, cracked the window to let the cool air in. The house was still wrapped in silence, but it felt different now. Not empty, not aching, just quiet in a comforting way. Like it was holding its breath for something soft and sacred. I didn't knock on his door. I didn't ask if he slept well or if he wanted to talk. Some wounds don't need questions, they need space. So I made soup. Not fancy, just simple chicken and rice. The kind I used to make when he was sick as a boy. Warm, gentle, easy to swallow when the throat's too tight to talk. I set the bowl in front of him as he came into the kitchen, hair tousled, eyes puffy but calmer than the night before. We didn't speak about the Bible, not a word about the note, not a whisper about the tears I'd heard through the wall. But I saw it. There it was. Next to his plate, resting on the table like it belonged there all along. No fanfare. No announcement, just presence, and sometimes that's more powerful than 1,000 apologies. He ate slowly, quietly, but he finished every spoonful, and when he placed the empty bowl in the sink, he turned and said, "Need help with anything?" I handed him a towel. No lecture, no smile, just a simple nod, and we moved around the kitchen like we used to, in rhythm, in peace. That afternoon, he raked the leaves in the front yard without being asked, repaired a loose hinge on the porch door, sat on the steps with me while the sun dipped low and the crickets started singing. Then came Sunday. I got dressed for church like I always do, didn't say a word, just hummed while I tied my scarf and buttoned my cardigan. As I reached for my keys, I felt a quiet movement behind me. He was standing there, shirt tucked in, tie a little crooked, Bible in hand, my Bible. He didn't say, "Can I come?" He didn't explain why. He just walked with me to the car. And during service, he didn't sing. He didn't stand for every hymn, but he stayed. He sat there, still and listening, like a man who hadn't found all his answers, but was finally willing to ask the right questions. No sermon needed, just soup and silence, and the kind of love that shows up without needing to speak. The days rolled on slowly, like molasses across warm bread, not fast but steady. He didn't pack to leave, didn't mention a timeline, he just stayed. He helped around the house, refilled the bird feeder, watered my lilies without being asked. We didn't talk about Melissa. Not at first, and I didn't push. Some stories need silence before they can be told out loud. But on a Thursday afternoon, while we were shelling peas on the back porch, he spoke. His voice was low, almost like he was talking to himself more than to me. "I thought I was protecting Melissa from judgment," he said. I kept shelling, listening. But really, I was protecting myself from truth. He paused. "I used her as a shield to keep God at a distance. To keep you at a distance. Because I didn't want to face the parts of me that still needed both." I didn't interrupt, didn't offer a scripture or a soft correction. I just reached across the bowl, laid my hand over his, and let him feel the answer in my touch. That's all he needed. Because the truth was, it was never about the wedding. Not really. It was about the roots he tried to bury. The ones he thought were old-fashioned, unnecessary, too heavy for the life he thought he wanted. But roots have a way of surviving, even under concrete. Faith doesn't die just because we stop tending it. It waits, quietly, like a seed under soil, holding on for rain. And now, after everything had fallen away, that old faith, mine, his, maybe even something new between us, had started growing again. Not loud, not fast, but deep. He didn't apologize for every choice, and I didn't expect him to. What mattered most was this. He saw the truth, and he didn't run from it this time. And maybe that's what real redemption looks like. Not a clean slate, but a heart turned back toward what it once walked away from. Quietly, fully, willingly. That was enough. So now I speak to you, the one listening from the quiet corner of your life. Maybe you've been told your voice was too much, or your faith was too strong, or your way of loving was too inconvenient for the world they were building. Let me say this gently. Don't fight them. Just leave the light on. You don't have to prove yourself. You don't have to explain what's already written on your heart. Some truths don't need defense, they just need time. They may throw away your invitation, they may roll their eyes at your prayers, but when the noise fades and the world lets them down, they might come back looking for home. And if you've lived with grace, they'll find it. They'll find it in the soup still warm on the stove, in the porch light still glowing, in the Bible under the pillow, right where love last left it. My son said I was too religious to speak at his wedding, so I sat in silence. But a year later, after the vows crumbled and the house turned cold, he came back. And when he found my Bible under the pillow, the same one she used to sleep on, he finally understood. It was never religion that held us together. It was love. Love written in ink and sacrifice. Love that waited. Love that never needed a microphone to be heard. Thank you for spending this time with me. If you've ever been told to sit down, hush up, or dim your light, share your story below. You are not alone here. And if you felt something today, I'd be honored if you'd subscribe to this channel. This is Granny Truths, where silence is not weakness. It's strength in stillness. It's justice without noise. It's love that doesn't leave, and this was mine.